I'm Stephen McGarvey, and I'm reading On Her Wings, The Story of Toni Morrison, written by Gerdine Nolan, illustrated by James E. Ransom. You know, I believe that girl could fly on the wings of words whenever she had a mind to. When Toni Morrison was born, her parents called her Chloe Ardella Wolford. Chloe had three siblings. Lois was first. Chloe came 18 months later. The girls were always very close. They had two younger brothers, George and Raymond. Long before Chloe became a reader or writer, she was a listener. Well, you know, everything is a story. Chloe loved to listen to her mother, father, and grandparents tell stories. She also loved hearing the music they made, the singing and violin and clarinet playing going on in the house. There were stories of the Bible, the myths and legends. Her parents told ghost stories and tales of the supernatural. For Chloe, the tales were frightening, thrilling, full of music and adventure. Stories that were at times painful, beautiful, and wise, sometimes all at once. She learned these stories and retold them to others. Chloe was little then, just listening. As she was growing up, those words and stories and music lit up with magic and meaning inside. Chloe, rhythms and lyrics and verses and texts surrounded Chloe and stirred up her storytelling imagination. The stories opened windows into her heart and allowed doorways to open onto the heart of the world. Her hometown of Lorain, Ohio, was much too poor and too small to be segregated. So Chloe went to Hawthorne Elementary School with the children from many different countries. Some were just learning English. She was the only student in her first grade class who could read, and she read well. Chloe loved reading. She was often asked to read with those who needed help. She didn't let it bother her too much that her teachers couldn't pronounce her name easily. There were words and music in the air. Chloe continued to read more and more, feeding a hunger that would never end. Chloe's mother was a member of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, but many in Chloe's extended family were Catholic. Chloe was close to a cousin who was Catholic. At 12 years old, Chloe decided to convert to Catholicism. She chose St. Anthony of Padua, patron saint of lost things, as her baptismal name. So now she was Chloe Anthony Wolford. In the 1940s, there were not many jobs for teenagers, but kids could clean other people's homes or work in their kitchens for 3 or 4 hours a day. Housekeeping was Chloe's first job. She earned $2 a week. $1 was for her mother. She kept the other. The second job she held was at Lorain Public Library. She was so happy to be surrounded by books. She was supposed to put the returned books back on the shelves. Every shift started with a tall stack of books. Fiction, history, drama, poetry, everything. With so many different books, she couldn't help it. She opened a book, and before long, she would be lost in the story. She had to get a different job. It didn't matter. Chloe's library work was a doorway to a freedom that was life-changing and kept her coming back for more books to read. Stories lifted her. She was just a listening, waiting, watching. Chloe did well in high school. She was involved in many activities. She was a library aide, class treasurer, and member of the National Honor Society, and she was involved in yearbook and drama. Her father, George Wolford, worked as a welder in the shipping yard. He taught his children to work hard and take pride in their accomplishments. Because reading, education, and learning were important to the Wolford family, it was certain Chloe would attend college. At Howard University, her friends had a difficult time with her name, too. So she told them to just call her Toni. She went on to Cornell University for graduate work and then taught at Texas Southern University. She later returned to Howard to teach English. There she met and married Harold Morrison, an architect. One day she would take those old tales that told the history of the world and use them to tell her own stories. After the birth of Chloe and Harold's firstborn, Harold Ford, Chloe joined on an on-campus writers group. Her marriage ended just before the birth of her second son, Slade. She made a new start. She left Howard University and began working as an editor in New York. Her sister Lois came along for support. Her future was being shaped. It was her turning point. And she started to write. During the day, she worked as an editor to publish other writers' stories. At night, after she put her children to bed, she started to write her own stories. She saw a beginning, but for a writer, the question always is, what do I want to write about? When she looked back over her life, after all she had seen and learned, she knew she only wanted to write stories about her people, Black people, specifically African American mothers and their children, in their communities and their families. She placed mothers and children front and center in the heart of her novels. Many people asked her, why? She simply answered, why not? When she was 39 years old, her first novel, The Bluest Eye, was published, but she wasn't happy when her editor put the name Toni Morrison on the cover. She felt herself to be Chloe Wolford. Toni was only a nickname. I'm telling you, that girl was magic. As the years passed, Toni Morrison published many, many books and won many, many important awards. It was when she won the Nobel Prize in Literature that she said, it was Chloe. By the way, she went to Stockholm last year to get the Nobel Prize. She was the first African American woman to receive the award. Toni Morrison wrote about the history and pain of Black life in the U.S. The stories she told were so hard to talk about, so very hard to tell. But she did. She wrote about slavery. She wrote about the hard times for Black people after slavery ended and their struggles to make a place for themselves in the world. She had learned from her parents and grandparents and great-grandparents the language of fearlessness and dignity, and above all, love and value yourself. Her story words were so mighty enough to lift that old blanket of oppression and pull against each thread until the blanket just unraveled. It was as if she could look beyond things as they were and see a greater vision. Inside the world created in her books, she sought to empower and heal, especially around the topic of skin color. She showed that it was just fine that people come in many different colors. That girl held the mirror of light and understanding in her hands, shining it, reflecting it onto the people of the world. It was as if she could look beyond things as they were and tell the untold stories that needed to be told. And then she showed us how to let go, take to the air and fly, soaring above the hurt to gain a new understanding of our lives, of all people. That girl was filled with magic. Her stories radiated poetry, liberty, wonderment, and light. With all the light that dwelled inside her, she led a way to understanding and acceptance. She paid attention, listened well, told us what she saw, what she heard. Then she went on to shine that light so others could see, so others could tell. Now you go on, you tell your stories.